The Elves and the Otterskin by Elizabeth H. Boyer. Chapter 1. Second sons of poor fishermen always got the short shrift, Ivarr reflected darkly as the old cart rattled and jerked along. The horse pulling it was much older than he was, and the cart itself was certainly from the first landing in Scoutski long ago. Ivarr glanced sideways at the owner of these relics, and summed her up as the oldest and most sinister-looking woman he had ever seen, even barring the fact that she was the famous witch of Hvitofell. She darted him a sharp glance, as if reading his thoughts, and he flapped the frayed reins in a useless attempt to startle some speed into the old nag. It merely swivelled one ear around and rolled its left eye in long-suffering disdain. Its other eye was missing, probably required in some unsavoury spell of old Birna's. Indentured to a witch! Ivarr heaved a sigh for himself and hunched his shoulders resentfully. This was typical luck for his father, Hoskuld of Fishless. Luck had abandoned Hoskuld long ago as a hopeless cause, leaving him to drift from misfortune to misfortune like a ship with no rudder in a rocky fjord. His wife and 7 children and various sponging relatives were his helpless cargo. The whole mucky bargain had begun harmlessly enough. Hoskuld and Thorgerda were arguing, as usual, about the lack of food, firewood, and clothing, and the overabundance of family to feed, warm, and shelter. Thorgerda argued, that is, and Hoskuld leaned upon the mantel, contemplating his own inner thoughts. The 5 youngest children rolled around on the floor like good-natured bear cubs, ignoring their parents and the damage their flailing limbs did to the meagre furnishings of the house. Ivarr and his older brother, Svein, exchanged worried glances. If the next winter was anything like the last one, none of the family would survive. Hoskuld finally bestirred himself to respond to a particularly withering insult from his good wife. "I've got it all thought out," he said. "I shall go a Viking next spring, as soon as the ice melts, and then we'll never have to worry about getting gold or food again." "You a Viking? Ha!" said Thorgerda. "And in the meantime all we have to do is quit eating. If I have to ask my brothers again for food this year—" "We have our chieftain," said Hoskuld hastily. "Old Braiscaldi won't let us starve if we work for what we get. And we do have 2 strong sons, who can herd his sheep, feed his horses, or whatever." Thorgerda's angry reply camouflaged Ivar's groan of dismay. Svein nudged him warningly. Their mother was in what they called her berserker state, in which she was known for her irrational acts of pure rage. But Ivarr whispered angrily at his brother, "I'm not working for that old tyrant again this winter. He'll work us to death, and you know it." He sank his chin onto his hands and glared at his exhausted old boots, which were leaking toes all round. "What I wouldn't give to get away from Fishless. I'd do anything. I wish I were old enough to go a Viking." "You'd have to ask Mother first." The knock at the door was unheard for a few minutes as the squabbling continued, and the 5 fat little younglings knocked the table over and broke a crock of cream. The crash seemed to bring everyone to his senses. Thorgerda snapped, "And that was my last crock." "Ah, well," said Hoskuld soothingly. "The cow's nearly dry anyway, so we won't be missing it for long." Thorgerda flung up her hands. "Such a man!" she shrieked, and was getting into full cry on her "such a man" tirade when the door opened and the old woman stepped inside. "Good day," she said, her eyes travelling around the house and finally settling on Svein and Ivarr. "The gods bless your house and all within. Looks as if they've been a bit neglectful of you lately. This place has a singularly luckless atmosphere, I might say." The cream, which was creeping towards her toes, filled the house with a sour smell. Thorgerda began to cluck and fluster, settling the visitor in a chair, bringing her a cool drink, and offering her a place to stay the night. Fishless was a good day's journey from the nearest settlements up or down the coast. Visitors and travellers were always made welcome, even if the family went hungry the next day, and Ivarr and Svein had to sleep in the cowshed. When all of the social amenities were taken care of, and the proper questions asked and answered about inconsequential things such as the weather and common acquaintances, the old woman took a slender pipe from the black pouch at her waist and began to smoke it. The 5 younger brothers and sisters stood around her in an admiring and mostly naked semicircle, mouths agape and eyes goggling. Thorgerda knew the fame of the old woman of Hvitefell as a healer, and she was dying to know why such a personage would purposefully want to meet her. But she concealed her curiosity. Hoskold leaned against the mantel shelf, already forgetting they had company. "And now you know who I am, and I've heard something of you," she began. "They call me Birna, the witch of Hvitefell, behind my back, just as they call your husband, Hoskold the Luckless, behind his. I've come here looking," she eyed Ivarr and Svein piercingly, "for a young man to hire for some work. I'm getting too old to tend my livestock and do the trading and harvesting. I live in a little shieling alone on the big fell near Hvitternes. I have 1 horse, 3 cows, and a flock of sheep and goats, and 20 geese. It's rather a lot for one old woman, in addition to my duties as a healing physician for man and beast. So I came here to take one of these great hungry boys off your hands, and I shall furnish his keep in exchange for work. In addition to that, I shall pay you each month with a share of milk or cheese or wool, and 4 marks in silver at the offset. Of course, he'll be expected to work hard to earn his keep, though." Her eyes were quick and sharp, noting the glance that passed between Ivarr and Svein. Thorgerda's eyes were alight in an instant, but she said, "Well, I'm sure you know that sons are a scarce commodity." She had 5 of the creatures, all hungry, "and one hates to barter them away, and I couldn't spare you my eldest, so it would have to be Ivarr." She managed to sound apologetic and portentous at the same time. "Well, what's wrong with him?" Birna's eyes flashed over him from head to toe. "He looks suitable. A little lean for his size, perhaps, but he'll get all he wants to eat at my house. I just hope he's not a daydreamer." She darted a snappy glance at Hoskold, who merely shifted his weight to his other angular leg and gazed out the window. Thorgerda's eyes followed the old woman's hands to a heavy little pouch that clinked as it was put on the table. Her eyes never left it as she said reluctantly, "I suppose we can ask Ivarr if he wants to work for you, but I hate to think of a son of mine becoming a servant. Perhaps—" I'll go." Ivarr could scarcely stand still. "I'll be glad to go, Mother. You were just saying yourself how we wouldn't have enough food for the winter, and what a nuisance we were, and—" "I shall have to think about it," said Thorgerda, with a chilling glance at Ivarr. He knew she would finally agree, but not until she had extorted more money from the old woman. "You're not exactly selling him," said Birna. This widened the eyes of the 5 younglings. They would forever after tell every soul they encountered how their mother had sold their second older brother to a witch. 5 marks and a more specific amount of wool and cheese sealed the deal. "What exactly shall his duties be?" said Thorgerda after they had struck palms and poured cups of ale. Birna shrugged and sipped her ale. The usual work around a farm. Tending the animals, milking, shearing, hay mowing, that sort of thing. And it would also be helpful if he had a working knowledge of magic, but that would be too much to expect, I fear. Thorgerda froze, and Hoskold stood up straight, his wandering attention at last brought home. Magic? He asked, rather vaguely. I fear the lad's education is sadly lacking in that aspect in particular. In fact, you're not likely to find a good witch or wizard in all of the East Quarter, or the West or South either. Now, the North. He plucked absently at his nether lip, already beginning to slide away into another reverie. No, it was the style not long ago to burn such folk, to discourage them. Birna made a snorting sound. If that's so, they skipped me then. No respectable witch or wizard would permit him or herself to be burned by a tribe of ignorant, fishy-smelling, sheep-eating skiplings. Ignorant folk like that are the ones responsible for driving the Alfar back into the unseen realm, much to the detriment of us who live here. This boy Ivarr has been told about the Alfar, at least, I assume. Elves, you mean? Thorgerda hated being at a disadvantage. Her face was red and her expression defensive. Whatever is the use? None have been reported round here in more than 100 years, you know. And people have begun to disbelieve in that shorter time. Ha! Birna sighed and shook her head, as if having second thoughts about taking a heathen into her household. Well, no matter. I'll set him straight soon enough. The sharp glance she darted Ivarr gave him his first clue it might not be an entirely jolly process either. Birna stayed the night and was ready to depart early the next morning, earlier than Hoskold was usually awake, let alone out of bed. Ivarr put his small parcel of belongings into the cart, shivering with early morning cold and apprehension. His parents had argued most of the night about hiring their son out to a witch, but the final consensus seemed to be that they still had 4 other sons, so they could afford to gamble with Ivarr, especially in the light of the 5 marks and the monthly stipend. Birna perched on the seat of the rickety cart as if it were a throne. I hope you can drive a horse, she greeted him. I expect I can manage, he said, eyeing the horse and wondering if she expected him to bring the dead back to life. The horse stood in the shafts fast asleep, its lips hanging and ears flopping. Behind such a horse it took them 2 days to get to Hvitenes and up the mountain to Birna's shieling. The house was a tight little turf hut, sunk into a green hillside, surrounded by neat animal pens and turf barns. Everything was spotlessly tidy, without a sag or a squeak, a marked contrast to Hoskold's disgraceful attempts at farming. As you shall see, your main task will be helping me with my practice. Birna showed him rows of herbs hanging from her ceiling to dry, several small skins tacked to the wall, and a large assortment of boxes and bottles, all carefully labelled. I shall require you to gather for me certain plants and substances in their season, and deliver them, or fetch them, as you are told. My knees and back are getting weak, and even my own spells and herbs won't cure what's practically worn out. You shall go where I can't, and people may come here at times to be healed. But most importantly, you will be required to listen to all I say and learn all I teach you. I won't be here forever, and I want someone to be able to take my place when I'm dead. If you're good enough, that is, and aren't as stupid as most skiplings. That's why I've spent the last 2 days telling you about the Light Alfar and the Dark Alfar. Dwarves, giants, trolls, and what not. If you are to be my assistant and some day replace me, you'll have to listen especially quick, my boy, or you'll find yourself food for the trolls. Ivar's head still reeled with all the information she had put into it, with the perfect confidence that he would absorb it. The problem was he could scarcely understand it. Two realms existing side by side, and the skiplings having no idea the Alfar realm existed. "Will I have to go into that invisible place you mentioned?" he asked, feeling a long, long way from Fishless. "Certainly. There's not much call for real magic in this realm, except for healings and fighting sendings. Once in a while we get to deal with a ghost walking and making a nuisance of itself, and someone always wants a charm to make the weather pleasant, or rain, or some such. But in the other realm is where you'll find real magic. You're not afraid, are you?" She pointed at a stool for him to sit on, and began pouring tea and cutting slabs of cold smoked mutton. She also had rhubarb soup, one of Ivar's favourites. "It's nothing to dread. All you require is the drops in your eyes and the proper spell in the proper place. I can see you'll need time to get used to the ideas of magic and power, and the two worlds. I shall allow you 2 years, during which time I'll make certain you become acquainted with all these strange ideas the skiplings try to disclaim. Later I shall introduce you to some Alfar. Lesson 2 shall be trolls, then wizards, and so on, until we get to necromancers." Her voice changed, and she put the pot down with a thump. "I hope you'll be happy here, young fellow, and find it an interesting life. I know it has its dangers and its rewards." "I think I'll like it," said Ivarr, thinking of the dangers and wondering what the rewards might be. "Good, good." The old woman could actually smile, a wintry smile, but her eyes warmed. She was a hard taskmaster after the absent-minded maunderings of Hoskold and the distracted fury of Thorgerder. She made him learn the names of the herbs she harvested, and what they were good for. Before long she was sending him out to the fells to gather them alone. He learned to make salves, potions, poisons, and simple charms. At night she drilled him with the legends and lore and history of the Alfar, and how the greed for gold had caused the dark Alfar to split off from the kings of light and become the master miners of the earth, forsaking the world above ground for their gold and powers of darkness. She told him about dwarfs and their 3 degrees of power, white, brown, and the powerful black dwarfs. He learned the names of their domains and leaders and wizards. They became as familiar as the names of the chieftains and lords of the Four Quarters. In this way, a year passed, and Ivarr began to enjoy his role as the witch's assistant. The farmsteads around Haviterness and north and south along the coast called on her for her healing arts, and were grudgingly beginning to accept Ivar's skills also. They often succeeded when all other attempts had proven fruitless. When Birna was feeling out of sorts, she sent Ivarr to apply the poultice or administer the herb or charm, at least to the 4-legged patients. Birna herself treated the human patients, who feared and respected her abilities. Ivarr itched to get his hands on some of the secret cures and spells she used, but she steadfastly told him he was not yet ready, although Ivarr himself was bursting with confidence. By the end of the 2nd year, Ivarr was fuming with impatience. He pestered Birna to give him something difficult to do, begged for new charms to try, and was always wanting to know exactly when he could go into the Alfar realm and actually meet Alfar and wizards. He was getting bored with holding her satchel and handing her things while she was getting all the credit for curing the patients. Steadfastly, Birna would say, "Later, later, after your lessons are finished. You are not yet ready. There's plenty of time, and you're still very young. Be assured, you shall have your purpose. Wait, learn, and grow strong." "But what purpose?" Ivarr demanded one day. You won't let me try my own skills any place where it really matters. How will I ever learn if all I get to do
is hold your satchel and hand you this or that, or pour horrible-smelling swill down a sick calf's throat. And you get to do exciting things like fixing corpses so they won't walk and stopping sendings. What exactly is this purpose you keep talking about? Birna sighed impatiently. You'll find out soon enough. It's only been 2 years, and you're not ready yet. But there is something special you want me to do. How am I to learn it if you won't even tell me what it is? What's the sense in waiting? You're not getting any younger, and the longer you wait, the more time is wasted if I'm supposed to do something special with these things that you're teaching me, or the things you only hint at, Birna. Impudent boy! How would you like it if I changed you into a goat? A most obnoxious young billy goat is exactly what you remind me of, she retorted, nodding at him furiously. Ivarr quickly made a few signs behind his back for protection. He wasn't sure even yet what to make of her notorious powers. He had seen her do many things, and there were other things he had almost seen or suspected, which she wouldn't permit him to ask questions about. Was she merely a herbalist with a few good luck and fertility charms thrown in, or was she something quite different? She never answered him directly when he asked if she were Alfar, and usually turned snappish on him. This time, however, he decided to goad her a little. "And there's another thing," he said, sidling around closer to the door for a fast escape if one became necessary. "You once mentioned Filger forms, and I've long suspected you occasionally turn yourself into a sly old grey fox, which I see spying on me almost every day. If you can do it, why can't you teach me how to do it for myself? Or is that something only the Alfar can do?" "You impertinent young rogue!" She whirled around from her wool carding, but he was out the door like a racehorse, whisking round the corner of the house out of sight, but not out of hearing. "Do you hear me, you great oaf?" shrilled Birna. "I know you're just around the corner, so listen up. I can see you're starting to think this whole business is nothing but a lark. I shall have to change that, yes, indeed. You're losing your respect. Yes, I believe it's time to teach you a little fear." Ivarr peered around the corner uneasily, somewhat taken aback by the tone of her voice. She was carding wool again, ignoring him, but the expression around her mouth was peculiar. Sometimes she said things to frighten him into obedience, but this time he had the feeling she meant what she said. He decided it would be a good idea to disappear for the day, and perhaps she would forget her threats. Ivar had spent all his free time for the past 2 years exploring the ravines and slopes of the fells above Havitenes. By this time he knew them well, and knew these ancient hills held many curious old secrets. He prowled around barrow mounds so old no one knew what was buried there, and forgotten ship rings, and other stone circles and solitary stones which had been planted by living hands. Birna was also snappish about the stones and told him to stay away from them, saying only that they were ancient guideposts put up by long-forgotten people for unknown destinations. When Ivar returned that evening to milk the cows and do the work, he attempted to behave himself and not ask too many questions. Birna seemed to have forgotten about her threat, much to Ivar's relief. In the days to come, Birna eventually let Ivar do more than assist. After half the year had passed, he was beginning to be more satisfied, but he was still aware of mysteries she kept dangling just out of his reach. One evening in early winter, they were returning home in the dark, although it was hardly into the late afternoon of the day. It was foggy also, so Ivar was not too surprised when Birna turned from the usual path. "Haven't you made a mistake, Birna?" he asked. "No, indeed. The last mistake I made was years ago, and it nearly cost me my life. I do not make mistakes any longer, as they can be very time-consuming and expensive. Now follow me closely, If I should lose you now, I can't imagine what trouble it would cause. Ivarr was suddenly reminded of her old threat to teach him fear. It was such an unwelcome thought on a night like this that he curtailed his questions and hurried after her. She strode along, showing no indication that her knees or back were getting old, as she claimed. Now that he thought about it, she never showed the least sign of disability. Finally she halted and stretched out her hand to touch an upright stone. Ivar's skin prickled when he realized they were standing inside one of the old stone circles. He found himself holding a fold of Birna's cloak, and he didn't care to let go of it either. "Birna," he whispered. She was standing stock still, concentrating. Her eyes flew open, and she pushed him behind a stone. "Quiet now, and watch. Something is going to happen. You stay here." She left him there, retreating to the top of the hill. Ivarr crouched unhappily behind the big stone, not liking to get too near it, nor too far away either. His hair bristled as if lightning were about to strike nearby. Then a light flickered in the shadows beside one of the stones. A small fire sputtered into life, and Ivarr stared at it like a bird staring into a snake's eyes. Suddenly he became aware of a dark shape taking form behind the fire, a tall, shadowy outline of a man with his hood drawn close around his face, so nothing showed. In one hand he held a curiously carved staff with the head of an adder and two tiny red eyes. When the stranger seemed solid enough, he turned to peer around into the shadows, and Ivar's heart thumped nervously. He seemed to look straight at Ivar's hiding place. Then he strode into the center of the circle where a low mound stood, and the fire glinted on the emblems and devices he wore around his neck and fastened to his belt. Ivarr could now see his beard and part of his face. He shuddered, not liking what it reminded him of. The summer before, the peat cutters had found a corpse in the bog, perfectly preserved by unknown chemicals. The stranger's face reminded Ivarr of the corpse's face, skin that looked like dried leather, stretched thinly over the bones of the skull, and hollow eye sockets sunken into shadows. The stranger opened a small bag similar to Birna's. What followed was a series of spells calculated to raise a corpse from his grave. This Ivarr knew from illicit snooping into Birna's book of spells. The necromancer took a parchment from his satchel and a stick carved with runes. He began to roll the stick back and forth across the mound, meanwhile reading from the paper in a droning chant the words which Ivarr knew were written in the necromancer's own blood. Other formulas were added to the chant, and the earth on the mound began to heave and stir. Unearthly moaning sounds and muttering voices carried to Ivar's pale, cold ears, but he was too paralyzed to run. The necromancer continued his spells, undaunted by either the sounds or the grisly sight of a head beginning to emerge from the earth. "Lorimer! Lorimer!" moaned a hoarse voice. "Let me sleep in peace." Lorimer chanted his spells faster and rolled the rune wand more briskly. The ghost rose further out of the grass, a bony, misshapen creature with a huge, knobbly skull and the remnants of a hairy hide still clinging to the bones. When lumps of soil threatened to tumble off the grave, Lorimer quickly caught them before they escaped. Once the grave was closed again, any clods of earth that fell off could not be replaced. "What are you troubling me for this time?" wailed the ghost. "Can't you let a body lie quiet?" "Not when I think it might be useful." Lorimer stopped his spells with the ghost still buried up to his middle in the earth, where it struggled ineffectually for a few minutes to escape. Lorimer then extended a cup to the ghost, which it snatched from his hands eagerly and drained in 3 large gulps, letting dark, thick trickles escape down its chin. "The blood always makes you glad enough to talk," said Lorimer. "Get on with it, then," growled the ghost, rather more lively now. "2 questions and no more." Lorimer leaned forward. "How can I turn Svartar, king of the dark dwarves, against his old friend and ally Elbegast of the light Alfar?" The ghost sighed. "Elbegast, Alfar, what a bane they are, even to an old dead troll like me. But I have seen the future, and I have a plan for you which will destroy Elbegast and his Snowfell, if you are clever enough. I have also seen 5 men of the Alfar in Svarta strike." "Yes, I know which ones. They are spies for Elbegast, but easy game for the rebels who follow me." "No, fool, listen to me," the rasping voice continued. "Let Svartar do that when the time comes. You must arrange a trap for these 5 spies, a web of outlawry, murder, and revenge. I see much blood and gold spilled, and I see that Svartar has a young son, a boy who likes to go about in the disguise of an otter. The death of a prince would excite every loyal dark dwarf, would it not? Particularly if it were a secret murder." "Ah, yes, I begin to see. These 5 Alpha spies shall soon become murderers and outlaws. Svartar will demand Wirgild for the prince, but I have ways of seeing to it that it shall never be paid. Then shall Svartar take vengeance upon Elbegast."
"No, I have a better idea. See to it Svartar gets the otter pelt. Tell him to put a spell on it, so it will get larger and larger for every piece of gold placed upon it. That way, Svartar will get all the gold, and since the pelt can never be completely covered to pay the prince's weregild, Svartar will have to attack Elbegast." The ghost made a grab for Lorimer just as the necromancer turned and stalked away. "You've been most helpful, Groose. If you'd been this cooperative when you were alive, I wouldn't have killed you. And now for my last question. Listen carefully, Groose. How can I overthrow Svartar and see Svartar strike for my own kingdom?" "Greedy, greedy, aren't you? Well, let me think a moment. Svartar. Yes, it may be possible. Let's see. Blast! I keep getting one of those wretched, skippling savages into my thoughts." His voice began to splutter and gasp. "Lorimer, you're in danger of your life. I see a terrible sword coming out of a barrow mound, a dwarfish sword with your death written upon it. A hero, a skipling will wield it, and you will perish in the soil you covet."
Lorimer tossed his head and uttered a mirthless chuckle. "I refuse to contemplate a death at the hands of a mere skipling. I have died 5 deaths, and returned stronger each time. No skiplings, Groose, but because of your fine warning, I shall take care to kill any skipling hero I find wandering in the Alpha realm." He unsheathed his sword, a long, slender blade that gleamed with a faint blueness in the moonlight. "And now Because you've been so helpful, I am going to take you with me on my travels, Cruz. The ghost waved its arms and made a fearful, grimacing cackle. You know very well what I do to you the instant I get my legs free of this grave. I'm older than you are, Lorimer, and far stronger. Lorimer raised his sword. I'm aware of that, old friend, but you'll be hard put to do anything about me, with no arms or legs, I fear. With one whistling blow, he swept off the corpse's head, and it rolled across the circle almost to Ivar's feet. Lorimer strode after it and snatched it up by the hair. You shall tell me more about this skipling hero, Groose, and I fear you really have no choice, unless you want me to leave you where the rats can find you, or any number of other unpleasant things. The head rolled its gleaming green eyes, and it sputtered and snarled. You can't do this. It's not. It's not decent. What about my poor body? You won't leave it like that, will you? Lorimer laughed harshly and put the head into a leather pouch hanging from his belt. He turned his attention back to the grave, much to Ivar's relief, after standing close enough for him to reach out and touch him. Lorimer began his spells and chanting, alternately cursing Groose, whose body was fiercely resisting reinterment. Groose chuckled unpleasantly. It doesn't want to go. Lorimer, perhaps we ought to take it along. You wretched little brute. It will go back into the ground. Sst! Lorimer, Birna's coming. Get us out of here. Lorimer whirled around to stare into the darkness in the direction of the hill, his cloak swirling and surging in an unfelt wind. Quickly he nodded the fire out. Then he grasped his staff and raised it aloft. With a burst of luminous smoke, the necromancer disappeared. End of chapter 1.